Hello everyone and welcome to a very different kind of Gwent content video than you're used to seeing from me. This is not a deck guide, this is not me narrating the journey story, this is me asking you questions about Gwent, the current state of Gwent in terms of expansion releases and what you'd like to see in the future. I'll give you my opinion and I will then link you the poll you can see here so that you can give your opinion as well. We are 2/3 of the way through the new style expansion cycle for Price of Power. We're a few days away from learning the title of the final stage of that expansion, instead of the old style where we had an expansion drop once every 6 months and then changes or balance fixes in the middle of that somewhere. This time we have 3 drops once every 2 months and we get a slice of the pie for the expansion, if you will. We get a little bit of it and then 2 months later we get another bit of it and then 2 months later we get the final piece of that. And it's probably a great time to review how that's gone, how that feels for Gwent and for its players, because ultimately this is something the dev team are really interested in. Has this experiment gone well? Are we overall on board with it? Because ultimately, let's be fair here, it's exactly what we, the player base, asked for. We asked the dev team, we said, hey, CDPR, we want more frequent content. We don't mind if it's the same amount of content overall, but we want access to it quicker. We want it now. We want the meta to change more frequently. We would like new things to play with, please. If you could go away and do that, that'd be great. And do you know what they went and did? They listened and they gave us exactly that. However, in my opinion, well, as anybody who's listened to me talk in the last couple of weeks will probably be able to tell you, spoiler, I'm not the biggest fan of the current version of this, and I'm going to explain why. But first, let's get to the pros of this. Gwent's most recent expansion style splits it into 3 pieces, and it's one big story told over 3 mini expansions. So, we get more frequent content release. When I heard they were going to do this as a content creator, as a streamer, and as a player, I was thrilled. I was like, oh my lord, it's either Gwent expansion month, or Gwent expansion hype month, or, oh my god, it's Gwent expansion month again. Like, how could this possibly be bad for the game? As a content creator, this is amazing news. And that is definitely still a thing. It is still either expansion month, where everything is new, or it is expansion hype month. That is definitely the case. As I say, we quite literally asked for this, and this is a great example of the dev team saying, okay, we will work towards what you as a community expect. Now, some cards in this have been slightly unbalanced as they've been dropped initially, and I think it's fair to say with any sort of development cycle, the more times you do something a certain way, the better you get at it. So, okay, certain cards have come in a bit of a weird state, which some of them, and I'll park the certain cards I really don't like the design of and think they're not very good for the game in terms of variants. I will park that argument for another video, but generally speaking, how to do this style of content would get better and better. They will get better at it, and helping to navigate that in theory should improve, right? So in theory, those are the positives that I can see. There may be more. If you have more, please do let me know down below in the comments. Jump into Twitter. There is a post for this on Reddit, or even in my Twitch channel. Let me know what you think. And if there are things I'm missing, tell me, okay? Now we move on to what for me is a slightly longer list. And I'm giving you my opinion on this first so that I can explain to you why the poll is as it is, and then explain why I voted the way I did. The cons for this, and I'm going to start with the big one. The biggest one for me, the overarching one for me. I don't like meta games where the meta is designed and developed and influenced exclusively by the devs. In a 2-month expansion drop cycle, we only ever get an artificial meta, because the new cards, especially when we get smaller chunks, i.e. 26 cards as we're getting, those cards either have to be so good they can carry an archetype on their back, or they fall short of that, which means they don't get played, and as a result, the other factions drop. Power creep has increased. Now, this leads to a few problems. You have to do this as the devs have to make these cards playable in these small chunks, otherwise why bother with the expansion? There's no point. The new content has to be there and has to entice you to want to play it past, ooh, it's shiny, because that will last all of 5 minutes if it gets absolutely mullered by lined pockets again. So it has to go in at a point where it's going to have an impact, because it's new content. Not just the Gwent devs do this, every game developer will do this. If you're developing for League of Legends and you're putting in a new hero, I bet their abilities are just a teensy bit overtuned to start with. It's just one of those things. But this leads to a dev-led meta, because it's either expansion month or it's expansion hype month, which means we never get that natural evolution of the old counter metas we used to get, not just because the devs are about to drop even more stuff in, literally any second now, but also because the natural level of power creep has had to increase to make the small number of cards relevant. We have seen this kind of drop hurt certain factions really badly, because when the 4 cards come in, especially in the early stages of these expansions, drop 1, when that happens, some factions will have enough tools with those 4 cards to become strong and to become meta, and others need more pieces to the puzzle. Take Scoia'tael. The first 2 months of this expansion cycle, Scoia'tael was comfortably the worst faction. Unplayable, dead, bin tier, not even in meta reports, because quite frankly it couldn't keep up. Then, and to be honest, Northern Realms was probably in that same boat as well, but it had Foltest carrying with Foltest Commandos, right? Foltest as a card was so painfully overtuned that it carried everything on its own because of how binary in nature that interaction is. Then you go to drop 2, and all of a sudden, Scoia'tael has more pieces to the puzzle now, and it's incredible. And by the way, some of those cards, the design and the new cards themselves, some of them are so cool. They add so many amazing new decisions into Gwent. When you look at the way megascopes work, and the ability to change certain interactions to make cards like Idaran more viable and have a higher floor because they're guaranteed to pop off at least once. When you look at Simless and the how am I going to make this work, and then the ability to pair the Orbs of Insight, which are phenomenally well designed. So cool as cards. So all of that stuff is amazing. But when I go back to the point, Scoia'tael needed that second drop for the first cards to really be relevant, which meant we had 2 months where that faction basically didn't exist. Northern Realms is still in that spot now, because it needs all of the pieces of the puzzle, we hope, to do that. The other downside, of course, is when we see this, how many of the cards for the factions that aren't doing very well right now are going to be overtuned so that those factions see play, and thus the cycle of power creep continues, because we're overtuning power crept cards on power crept cards that are power crept well above what used to be considered the acceptable level, right? And when I talk about power creep in Gwent, a point or a provision is a massive difference, and we currently have cards in the game that are 5 provisions that can trade for 27, 6 provisions that can trade for 30. That's very scary, especially when you think those are the cards that new cards have to be better than. Oh boy, I am not sure how you bring stuff up to that level consistently without getting to some seriously crazy numbers and ending up like Blizzard at the end of Wrath of the Lich King needing a desperate stat squish because numbers are just so big they become unpalatable to deal with. So yeah, how could you combat this, you say? Okay, well, let's say we stick with the mini expansions, but we treat them as their own individual expansions. Well, we've already seen 4 cards is very rarely enough to support a whole archetype, and certainly wouldn't be for all 6 factions, for individual archetypes, every single time. It just simply wouldn't. Those expansion drops would feel very... A lot of the time, so many of those cards would go in and they just wouldn't hit the mark. And if you're not going to consistently build a path in later expansions to support them, a lot of the cards you're putting in, quite frankly, are going to just be filler cards. Now, we moved away from that when we used to have more cards drop, but most of them weren't necessarily relevant or playable, and I think that was a great decision by the team to do that. So I don't want to go back to that. I've seen people suggest, well, let's have 4 cards per expansion, but let's not support a specific archetype. Personally, I think that's insane. I think that is a completely pointless exercise. I'm putting in 4 monster cards, and the epic is going to support one archetype, and the legendary another, and then the common another, and the rare another. I'm basically saying to you, I am throwing in misc cards. Because again, there is no cohesion to that. You can't release that kind of product and expect it to work well, in my opinion. I can't understand how that would work, because you're now trying to desperately pad various things, and ultimately it's going to be who got the legendary as to what archetype has the best chance. There needs to be a sort of a thought out plan, and I don't think there are many archetypes in the game that would feel consistently better by just dumping in 4 cards into lots of different things and hoping the meta would grow. There's a reason expansions used to be bigger than they are, because those cards gave you time to explore them, they allowed a bit of variety between not just one archetype, but one general archetype, and then you would learn to bridge where they would fit elsewhere. At the moment, the cards that fit elsewhere, within their factions, are the ones that are just so good, you don't include them. Yes, Mamuna, I'm looking at you. You just put that in everything because, well, why wouldn't you? It's so many points, right? There's just no reason not to include it. And again, is that a good thing? Don't know. So, the short release cycle has other problems that we as players don't necessarily think about, yet complain about all the time. If we are going to have expansions every 60 days, the time to test those cards, to check them for balance, to make amendments, is minimal. The ability to have that PTR in any effective way without trying to desperately cram it into a very short period of time is problematic. And the PTRs make a big difference to the cards that are eventually released from the original design concept. But ultimately, the more time you could have for that, potentially, the better it would be. So perhaps a slightly longer expansion cycle would be healthy for the cards coming into the game as well. Another one, and it's a big one, it was really contentious. In the current mini expansion style, you cannot have expansion kegs until the very end, or rather they've made the decision not to. If we stuck to just short expansions, well, based on the way kegs work, we're never going to get expansion kegs again. Because if there are 26 cards going in and you give me an expansion keg for that, I don't think I need to put any money into Gwent ever again, and the value of ore skyrockets compared to what it is in new expansions. So what? So maybe those kegs have to be far more expensive? Is a decent, perhaps, counter to that? I don't know, but I don't know how many times I would want to go through a faction keg or a specific keg for an expansion on day one if I'm only looking for 26 cards. I've seen how painful that is when it's 70 cards and you end up with 30 copies of the same damn bronze and you still miss card X, right? So I don't think that's a good idea, and I think that's going to cause a problem. So I'm not the biggest fan. I'll be honest. I thought I would love this content release style. I thought I would love this expansion style. And in terms of a playability front, I really don't enjoy it, because the game feels like it is constantly dictated by 4 or 5 cards that you either have to play or have to counter, because those are the new cards that have come in this little bit of expansion, and that's really frustrating. It doesn't feel like you can pilot slightly off meta decks anywhere near as frequently, no matter how well you play them. You can pull off your whole combo, you can do everything right, and you can lose by 40. And it didn't feel that way. And I do think the style of this release is why. Now, this is not me criticizing the team. I know how hard they work. I know how much they love this game, how much effort, love, and passion the people who are working on Gwent put into this game. I speak to them, I get to see them interacting, and it's amazing. And I know they want what's best for Gwent. They want what is going to give a balanced and enjoyable experience. And the reason I put this together is, perhaps I'm the only person who doesn't like this. Maybe 95% of people who are going to fill in this poll are going to say, you know what, Lionheart, shush. I'm used to this. It's fine. And I'll go, oh, it's just me. No worries. Cracking job. Based on the conversations I've had across Twitter, Twitch, Discord, I don't think that is the case. But ultimately, let's find out. Let's find out. So, why did I make the poll? Well, as I've said, it's the perfect time to address this. Right now, the last drop is about to go in, and we're going to have 3, maybe even 4 months without another expansion, which, based on what we've been used to, is a really long time, right? This is when they're going to be making the decisions about how this works. Now, Vlad has already said, that's Thor Serpent, has already said, you know what? I am very interested in what the community thinks about this. He's replied to the poll in terms of, he's spread it himself as well. They want to know what we think about this and have a history of listening to us on this kind of thing. They want to give us what we want. We asked not to be the boost and damage game. They reworked and gave us fun archetypes. We asked for things to feel a little bit wackier and some crazy stuff come in. We got like Way of the Witcher expansions and some of the crazy stuff that came in with that. Okay, I still hate Alchemist. Fight me. But they listen. It isn't just click your fingers and they saw 7 people say something. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes work. And that's why I want to get ahead of this. That's why I want to try and get the sort of the feeling of the community and from as many people as possible, as early as possible, so they have an idea, so that they can then sort of put some feelers out and get more information on what this means. This is a really light touch survey. It has 3 questions. It will take you 2 minutes of your life to fill in. If you're a Gwent player, I would love to get your feedback. So question 1. What rank did you reach last season? You're thinking, well, why are you asking this? Do you only care about pro rank players? Not at all. Quite the opposite. It's something like 2% of people who play Gwent every month actually get to pro rank. Sounds like a crazy stat, right? But apparently it's true. Yet the vast majority of total gameplay probably is between rank 5 and pro rank, because the people who play the game the most do sit in that position, right? But ultimately, Gwent's got a really weird paradigm where a huge percentage of its player base never gets anywhere near pro rank and isn't interested in doing that. We have to have a fun, varied game for them. But if you don't keep the top 100 players happy in terms of meta balance, viability, and fun to as much of an extent as you can when you're grinding at that kind of level, the game also doesn't survive, because they are the lifeblood of the esports scene. That 100 players, and it realistically is about that at most, who are effectively able to compete at that level, even like over the year, there has to be a viable game in that section as well. So I'm really curious, and I want as many people who play Gwent at any rank as possible to answer that question. Question 2 then. Do you like the current style of content release? The first one, and to be clear here, all of my answers assume we are getting exactly the same number of cards, right? I didn't bother putting in I would like an expansion every 2 months, but I want 70 cards every 2 months. Because, let's be realistic, that is not possible. It would be pointless, and it would, to be honest, exacerbate different problems and solve others. So, all of the answers that you've got the options are, they're assuming the same total number of cards is going in. I am asking you how you would like your slices served to you. The top one is yes. I love the current 2 monthly cycle. Keep it as that. The next one, switch to a drop every 3 months. Okay, cool. The next one, revert to the old style 2 expansions. That's 1 every 6 months. And then we would have old content in the middle of that, like we used to, whether they were leader reworks or individual single card drops or whatever, like we used to. Maybe they'd be paired with Journey. And then the last option, which I wasn't initially going to put in, and was talked into when I was coming up with this poll on stream, is have 3 expansions. So each individually, they are their own expansion. They are not slices of other things. 3 expansions, 1 every 4 months. And I didn't answer this when I answered the poll, but I am actually swayed towards that now, because I think you would have enough cards for the content to feel meaningful. 4 months is enough time not only to balance anything that's gone in wrong, to develop a meta without having to excessively power creep, have a wide enough pool of cards to actually explore them, create a meta that then evolves into a counter meta that then counters the counter like it used to. I'm now thinking that would actually be my answer if I were answering now. I initially answered 1 drop every 3 months, because I think more frequent content in principle is good. But I'm not sure now if the every 3 months would be enough. Now bear in mind, this is just expansion new release content. I'm not talking about reworked cards, leader changes, journey, draft updates, whatever on earth Golden Necker mode is. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. All of that would still happen around this as well as any special events and stuff that would come into the game. This is just the expansion cycles. So I would love to know what you think, and I would love to get your vote on that. And the last one, the final question, told you, short survey. Do you want reworked old cards to be packaged as part of expansion content? So, the first answer is no. And what I meant by this question was, at the moment, we have I think something like 400 or 500 Gwent partners, and there are 26 cards that can be revealed. it would be really interesting if we went to a sort of a 3-monthly cycle where, okay, we're going to get 40 cards every 3 months, something like that, 45 cards. Well, would it be nice if 2 cards per faction got a rework? And I don't mean, oh, we've buffed that by 1 power. I mean cards we have not seen played since the dawn of time were reworked as part of these expansion cycles and were re-released. Would you like that at the same time, or is that the kind of thing you would like entirely separate to the expansion cycle? Now, no is the first option, and when I made this, I clarified, no, just do that as a separate thing. And then there are 2 other options. Yes, and support the new archetypes with them. So if it's Way of the Witcher, we did this with the Silver Witchers to some extent, reworked them, gave them adrenaline. Silver Witches is an old beta Gwent term for Lambert, Eskel, Vesemir, the 3 cards that come out on thin. If you don't know, I still speak in beta Gwent. My apologies if that made no sense to you. So reworking those and supporting existing archetypes, would you like that to be a thing? Or, yes, I would love them to be repackaged, but don't rework them. So we've just had a whole cycle of Spelatiel support for Scoia'tael. Could we have reworked 2 or 3 cards and made Harmony great again? Or at least made Harmony viable enough that it might show up in the meta sometimes, so it's in the back of your mind that you can't just focus a specific strategy. Maybe. Okay, yes, I really want Saskia to be reworked. Yes, I want them to turn it into effectively a Harmony version of Brathens, and I've gone on about that plenty. But effectively, that is the poll. It's as simple as that. It took me probably 20 plus minutes to ramble on and explain why I wanted to do it. It's going to take you 1 minute to fill it out. At the point I'm recording this, 900 people have already given their opinion. 900 members of the Gwent community have already come in and said, this is what I think. I'm going to give an update to how this poll is going on Monday, the 20th of September. And then on the 30th of September, the poll will close. I will do a review of where it is, and I will provide all of that information over to the team at CDPR, and maybe even do more of a deep dive based on the information we have with them, with the community, to see what people think. Because if there is a very clear opinion, and that opinion isn't stay the same, please, this is quite a open set of questions. I haven't taken suggestions yet, and I would love them. So if you do have suggestions or thoughts and you want to be a bit more specific than the very narrow options I've given you, write them down below. Tweet them at me. Why not? Hopefully I haven't taken up too much of your time and you've enjoyed this. If you have thoughts, please do share them as always, because not only I, but the entire Gwent community and developer team are always interested and they are always listening. Never forget that. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time, where maybe I'll be doing something else. Love you guys, take care, and have a good rest of your day.